This is a production of WGBH2 Boston.
Tonight on Greater Boston, 3 more contests tomorrow, so the presidential candidates are marching on with their campaign plans. But now some GOP leaders are going rogue in an effort to stop the seemingly unstoppable Donald Trump. Now, something we'd all like stop at his rallies is this.
Guy grabbed the sign out of my right hand and then sucker punched me. And then he got on top of me and hit me a couple more times.
And while the president privately tells big donors to rally around Hillary, Bernie says he's the only Dem who can bring down Trump. And now Elizabeth Warren and Trump are in a cage match. Plus, with Barack Obama's visit, change is coming to Cuba. What will it mean for people of both countries? Then later, meet our latest Greater Bostonian, who's managed to bring together volunteers to help more than 1 million people whose communities have been ravaged by natural disasters around the world. And finally, why spring is here, no matter how much it snows. Big question on the road to the White House this week: how can the West be won? With contests tomorrow in Arizona, Utah, and Idaho on the Republican side, it's all about stopping Trump, with analysts drawing up intricate delegate plans that determine how Cruz and Kasich might be able to divide and conquer. Meanwhile, GOP leaders are running through lists of potential third-party candidates. On the Democratic side, Clinton is turning her attention to Trump as well, while Sanders, quoting that political sage Yogi, says it still ain't over till it's over. Joining me are Cynthia Dill. Cynthia's a civil rights lawyer, former Democratic Maine state senator. She's backing Hillary Clinton. Nice to meet you, Cynthia.
Pleasure
and
to be
Bob Hedlund, Republican mayor of Weymouth, and he's a former state senator. He's a recovering Rand Paul supporter who now describes himself as, quote, warming up to the idea of Donald Trump. Good to see you, Mayor. Let's start with you. Why the warming? You're a big-time libertarian kind of guy. Why are you warming to Trump?
You know, trade was a big issue for me, and as a libertarian, I do believe in free trade. I don't believe any of the deals we've done since NAFTA have been actual free trade deals, and I think that's one of the biggest problems facing this country is the loss of middle-class jobs. The message that Trump is putting forward on trade, I agree with. And, you know, it's interesting that he has the same message on that as Bernie Sanders. I think it's an important message, and I think it's the reason why both of those two gentlemen have done as well as they've done thus far in this campaign.
It has nothing to do with the fact that Trump won your city 4-1? Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, he's done well, and he did pretty good in Massachusetts all along, but he certainly did very well in Weymouth. And sadly, my guy got 14 votes in Weymouth, unfortunately.
Rand Paul.
Yeah.
Does this not worry you? I mean, I know this guy. He's not a bigot. He's not a racist. He doesn't hate Mexicans and Muslims. So isn't he exactly the kind of guy that should make your candidate nervous, assuming she's the nominee come fall?
A Republican?
No. Yeah, exactly.
No.
Why not?
Because I think generally Republicans will get behind the Republican candidate, and Donald Trump is the Republican candidate who's leading the nomination going into the convention with the most votes.
There's practically a revolution in the Republican Party, from Mitt Romney to Paul Ryan, maybe a candidate, to whatever. So they're not getting behind him at all.
Well, I think Donald Trump is probably the best candidate for Hillary Clinton to run against. I disagree with Bob's suggestion that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are, you know, tied at the hip when it comes to trade. I think Donald Trump has his favorability ratings are so low. A majority of Americans say they won't vote for him. So
who has the second worst favorability ratings in America? Your candidate,
yeah.
Hillary Clinton. Can I read you something from the Globe?
But she may have the second worst favorability ratings, but that's in large part because Bernie Sanders' favorability isn't polled. So, you know, it's hard to know what his ratings are when he's not included in the
that's
poll.
actually not true. I just saw a poll this morning where he is of the 5 candidates, the only candidate who has a positive favorability in men and in women is Bernie Sanders. I want to read you something, a terrific piece.
You said it's not true, but it is true with respect to the Washington Post poll, for instance, that was used as the basis of a question when Hillary Clinton was asked about her trustworthiness in the most recent debate on a Tuesday night before 6 million viewers. That poll, the Washington Post poll, did not include Bernie Sanders.
I want to get to that dishonesty thing because I know you wrote a piece that I read that was a good piece. But I first want to, there was a piece by this writer, Roland Marullo, today in the Globe called "It's the Humiliation Stupid." And after he talks about, sure, there's some bigots, there's some racists, and he says, but when white working class people hear this white privilege thing, quote, but imagine what it's like to come home from working a job or 2 jobs you hate that exhausts you, that leaves you $5 at the end of the week for a child's birthday gift, and hear someone call you privilege. Imagine what that feels like. This is a territory in which the Mitt Romneys and talking heads of this world cannot stretch their thoughts. Hillary Clinton has a problem with those same people, does she not?
Those same people being white men, yes, absolutely.
No, I mean whites in general who feel humiliated by the economic strangulation in this country.
Yes, but I read that piece and I agree with you that it's good, and I agree with you that Hillary Clinton has a problem with white working class men. But when you talk about white working class women, they relate much more favorably to Hillary Clinton because she talks about things that will actually make a difference in their lives, like paid family leave and, you know, health care decisions made by women and not government.
Paid family leave. At the first debate, she attacked Bernie Sanders, saying that he wanted to raise taxes $1 a week to pay for paid family leave. Is that supporting paid? Who's going to pay for it?
She has been supporting paid family leave far longer than Bernie Sanders.
But how's she paying for it?
Well, I think, you know, I mean, she's going to pay for it by, she has said, you know, raising some taxes and, you know.
She said she will not raise taxes on the middle class, period. That's what, at least what I've heard her say so far. Can I get to your guy?
Paid family leave doesn't get paid for by the government. It gets paid for by employers.
Let's talk about your guy for a second. What, in addition to these endless articles in the Times yesterday and the Globe today about these machinations to try to make sure if he doesn't reach 1237, how they take this away from him, they're now talking of potential third-party candidates, maybe Paul Ryan. Is there not a revolution in the Republican Party if he gets, let's say, to 1150 or 1160, even if it's not a majority, if they attempt to take this away from the front runner?
If the insider establishment fools actually go through with this, and I don't think they would, I think this is a lot of media hype associated with some discussion that may be occurring, but
is
it's
Mitt Romney one of
overblown.
those fools?
I don't know how intimate in that discussion he is.
He's
but
the
I will
lead
tell you,
spokesperson.
But
for
I will,
this
well,
movement.
if they go through with this, I will tell you it will create a third party. It will fracture the Republican Party indefinitely. I think it'll be an historic situation, and you will see a third party formed out of that. Because,
which means her candidate
because
wins,
the level
right?
of anger you would see would just be incredible. And you know, you see, you're talking about just an appeal by Trump to white middle class men or white lower middle class men. It goes beyond that. If you look at the turnout that we've had in many of these states thus far, and the turnout in my hometown where we had a significant and record amount of people going in and asking for Republican ballots. And it isn't just white men. Those numbers prove that significantly. So I think the Republican Party should embrace the fact that they're bringing people in to the process and into the Republican primaries and try to carry that over and use that as a way to succeed in November.
You know, Cynthia, in the polls, the one thing you're right about clearly is Trump is the most vulnerable to Hillary Clinton of the three Republicans. But a woman who ran for governor in Massachusetts, Shannon O'Brien, said on a radio show today, she ran against Mitt Romney years ago, said people who support Trump, it's not about the policies, it's not in the head, it's the emotion. And so when you read the Hillary Clinton campaign, what's that?
I don't agree with that.
Well, she does
not in the general election.
What's that? But Hillary Clinton says her people say she's going to attack him on the failure of his businesses, his bankruptcies. The Trump supporters care about any of this stuff. They care that he's going to fight for them, don't they?
Yes, but the Trump supporters right now are not a majority of Americans.
That is correct.
These are the passionate people that have come out to the primary. The Republicans have done a good job having a field of candidates, drawing a lot of people. They have record numbers and voting turnout for primaries. But if Trump is the nominee, then that opens up the voting to so many people that haven't been tapped yet, so many people who haven't been polled, they haven't expressed their positions. And I don't think that Trump, people who are angry and feeling left behind and the people who are suffering economic inequality, they have a broad range of feelings. And I don't think Trump is going to...
On that point, if I may, I don't think the Trump supporters are going to ditch Trump because of lawsuits about Trump University or there was some excess fat on a Trump steak or something. The same way, Hillary's people aren't going to abandon Hillary because of Benghazi and email servers. It's just not going to happen.
So they're going to both be fighting for that, you know, a segment in the middle, the undecided voters, the independents, the moderate Democrats, the more moderate Republicans. And those people, I think, when they're given the choice between a Donald Trump and a Hillary Clinton, sure, some of emotion's going to play into it, but I also think they're going to pay attention to the policy.
You have a candidate, you almost have a candidate. Let's go to someone who doesn't have a candidate at all. She was on MSNBC a couple of nights ago. Here she is.
I take Donald Trump very seriously. What he is promoting is a form of hate that is virulent and that is bad for this country. We cannot have a man like this as a serious candidate for president and have him threatening to take over the White House. This is not a reality show. This is real life, and this is our country.
And the amazing thing, it took Donald Trump 3 whole days to respond. Saturday he tweeted, I think it's wonderful because, it's in Maureen Dowd's column in the Times on Sunday, because the Indians can now partake in the future of the country. She's got about as much Indian blood as I have. Her whole life was based on fraud. She got into Harvard and all that because she said she was a minority. In light of the fact this is probably the lead spokesperson on economic inequality in America, how does it help your guy when he's trying to relate to these humiliated people, when he's savaging on the lowest level possible? Elizabeth Warren, I don't get it at all.
Some of his rhetoric I don't get either. I mean, you've already got, for instance, last week you had Marco Rubio basically buried, right? And you're in Florida and you're piling on. And to me, I don't get that tactic. He's going to be the nominee.
Isn't that fair to say he's a bully? Yeah. Isn't that a fair statement?
He's a New Yorker, right? But I would say, I think this rhetoric about the racism and all that is overheated, over the top rhetoric. I don't think it, and I think
Muslims refuses to develop.
I said some of the stuff is overblown, but I think some of the reaction is overblown too.
Before we do that, very quick reaction. Speaking of Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, when she was asked 3 times in a row on CBS Morning Show the other day about whether your candidate should release those Goldman Sachs transcripts, she would never answer the question. Until your candidate does, shouldn't people assume the worst, that she says what some detractors are suggesting, that she went and cozied up to the people that help almost destroy this economy? That's a fair conclusion, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is, because I think what she has said is, I'll release the transcripts of my own speeches when all the other candidates do the same.
But that's ridiculous. The Republicans are on the side of Wall Street. She's the one who says she's going to take on Wall Street. It's apples and oranges, isn't it?
Wall Street is not with Donald Trump. Wall Street absolutely is not with Donald Trump.
Well, who is Wall Street
Wall Street
with?
Journal has been savaging Donald Trump.
Wall Street, listen, if you have money, you pay the Republicans, you pay the Democrats, you hope to curry favor whoever is the winner. Hillary Clinton has released the transcript of at least one speech, or it was released, and what she said to the Wall Street bankers is what she says to everyone. We need to empower women on Wall Street.
So let us see the transcript.
Well, I agree with you, but I would also agree with Elizabeth Warren that Donald Trump, in her words of, an elitist, is a loser.
Nice to see you.
Really nice to see you, too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mayor, pleasure to see you
Mayor.
as well. Still ahead, our latest Greater Bostonian, a local man who's harnessing the goodwill of others to make a difference around the globe. Plus, my thoughts on this white start to spring and why it's not getting me down in the least. But first, they call it the land time forgot, Cuba. Yesterday, Barack Obama became the first president to set foot in the country in nearly 9 decades. Today, he sat down with Cuban President Raul Castro to talk about the path towards normalizing relations between the two countries.
After more than 5 very difficult decades, the relationship between our governments will not be transformed overnight. We continue, as President Castro indicated, to have some very serious differences, including on democracy and human rights.
Just a few hours before Air Force One landed in Cuba, dozens of protesters were arrested. They were members of a group called Ladies in White, who demonstrate each week speaking out against human rights violations and other repressive tactics of the Cuban government. Obama plans to meet with members of the group tomorrow. Meanwhile, many American tourists begin to make plans to visit the island nation. Joining me to discuss what they'll find are Sally Jacobs, former Boston Globe reporter, who's visited Cuba 3 times over the past 20-plus years and is getting ready for her 4th trip. Sally, it's nice to see you. Christopher Muther, Boston Globe travel writer, made the trip to Cuba back in August. Hey, Chris. And Doug Struck, a former Washington Post and Baltimore Sun journalist, now the senior journalist in residence at Emerson College. He, too, recently visited Cuba ahead of the many changes. Nice to see all 3 of you. So most of us are relatively uninformed, and we have these visions about what Cuba's like. What will surprise us most if we end up there in the next 6 months to a year, Sally?
How different some aspects of Cuba are from what you see on TV.
Like how so?
You look at downtown Havana, you hear all the tourism, all the hotels. You go outside of Havana, very far, go out half an hour, you find incredible poverty. You find huge disparities between black and white. You find all kinds of things that you don't hear about in Havana.
What a surprise, according to you, Chris?
Some of the biggest surprises was the dichotomy within Havana itself. There's a very chic scene happening right now in some of the restaurants, some of the guest houses. However, there's also extreme poverty. People go on tours and they'll go and they'll see the pastel buildings and the old cars, and they're charmed by it. But as I'm sure you saw, Sally, you walk a few blocks away, and there are trees growing through houses. The places are crumbling. It looks like a war zone. So I feel like there are some areas, World Heritage sites, where the government has money to make these improvements, and they've done it, and those are the areas that we've all seen images of. But outside of that is the real Cuba.
So you're going to make it unanimous? The two Cubas, to paraphrase John Edwards, I guess, about a different nation? Is that what will strike us most?
It's true, although it is an autocratic place, and one of the things that I find different about that autocratic place than other autocratic places is there's so much joy and so much music going on that it really is a fun place to be. But yes, there is two Cubas, and there is a lot of disparity. I looked at the environment while I was there, and one of the themes is that because of the embargo, the environment is pristine. Well, it's not in places. It's really not.
But, one of the major selling points to the U.S., and you raised this in a piece you wrote, Doug, I think you've all touched upon it, is one of the wonderful things about our involvement, for those who are supportive of what the president has done, is we're going to relieve people who are in dire poverty, fix what ails them. But others are writing, all it's going to do is accentuate the divide. Where do you fall in this?
I think it's sort of like the trickle-down theory of economics that the Republicans have been pushing for a long time, that it will not really benefit the folks on the lowest ladders. Maybe there will be jobs that there aren't there now. Maybe some of the currency will seep down into the pesos that are used in everyday life. But it's going to benefit the folks who have the money, have the connections, and they're on the top rung.
So the most painful part of what exists now, according to you three, is going to be made worse by an invasion of American tourists. Is that where you're going?
I think it has a real possibility of that, yes.
Anybody disagree with that?
I think there's a little variation on that, which is the division between black and white is becoming more pronounced. After the revolution, there was a certain equity. The government provides various things, education, health care. There was a certain parity to everything. With remittances, you can now send more. It's gone from, I think, 2,000 to 8,000 that people can send back to Cuba. Well, most of the people that left Cuba after the revolution were white because they had property. They had things to lose. Many of the people of color stayed there. Whites are more than 2.5 times more likely to get remittances in Cuba than are blacks. Now, that's the money that's being used to open up paladars, for the casas. That's the capital, the seed money. Most people of color don't have that. So
those are restaurants and
they're restaurants and
houses.
Sort of, and any kind of little small micro business, which is now legal, is much more heavily dominated by whites than blacks, and it's getting wider all the time.
So economic divide and racial divide. You politely raised your hand, Chris, when I said, does anybody disagree with Doug? So you want to respond?
Well, I agree with the trickle-down idea, but I also feel like it can only help, and people were so optimistic when I was there. People were so eager to talk to me about the sanctions being lifted, and actually they wanted to know what I thought, if they would stick. A lot of the people who I encountered, for instance, tour guides, I had one who was a linguistics professor who left because he was making $20 a month, which I think tends to be standard there. And he was making much more giving tours of the Hemingway House. So I feel like the more tourism opportunities there are for people, the more some people might be able to engage. I still feel like there will be that divide that Sally was talking about. But on the other hand, I think for professionals or for people who know English quite well, I think there will be some opportunities there.
But the thing I don't understand is, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is there are millions of tourists already. They're just not primarily American tourists.
There's 3.5 million and
a year?
Last year. And
with just a trickle of that being American from the United States.
160,000 of them.
So why will the impact of American tourism be so profound? Because the numbers will be so immense?
Because we're next door neighbors, and the 160,000 will increase tremendously.
How do they feel about us?
I got nothing but positive feedback from people who I spoke with. Obviously, I was talking to people in restaurants and that sort of thing, but people were quite open with me about the United States and their feelings about it.
Positive?
Positive, even though I've heard, they've heard for decades that the United States is sort of the oppressor, the reason why they have food shortages. People did not necessarily feel that way. They didn't feel animosity, is the sense that I got.
They have is the government and the American people, are they viewed as different entities or no?
No, I think yes and no. I think they're just feeling optimistic about the arrival of Americans and what it means, because as I'm sure we've all seen, when you're there are food shortages. You can't get peanut butter. You can't get. So just the idea of lifting embargoes and being able to just have more in the country.
Do you see the same perception of us there?
I do, but a little twist to it also. I feel that there's very good feeling, and the government is the government, but they're very, happy about American people.
Human to human.
Yes, but they also talk about Americans a little bit like a foreign species. Several people I interviewed were like, I've never seen an American. I hope an American comes here. It's like a novelty. It's a very exciting thing.
The joke in Havana is that Cuba is the one place that Americans would be welcomed in the world.
That's a pretty good joke. Very quickly, did you see any of the repression we're reading about that today? I mean, that we talked about that the organizations were cracked down upon in anticipation while Obama was in the air. Do you see any of that when you're there, or you just hear those stories?
I didn't see it, and I operated freely as a journalist. I never had anybody stop me. Lots of other countries I've worked in are a lot more repressive on the surface. But again, I didn't see it. I wasn't out with the women in white.
Quickly, did you see it?
I mean, what I saw was vestiges of, it's a communist country, and so you drive and you'll see billboards for Castro. Those are the only billboards you see, and some of them were anti-American billboards. And that was really the only thing that I saw.
Do you see it at all?
The Damas de Blanco are a fixture. They're out every Sunday, and everybody knows about them. And you ask people, and they're quite divided, is this a good thing or a bad one? So, yes, I did see them there, and there was a police presence, but I didn't see people dragged away.
Sally, it's nice to see you. Thank you so much. I think the Gronk Party Cruise is going to go there next year.
I hope so.
Nice to see you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Pleasure. Join us tomorrow when we'll take up the political debate about whether Obama's Cuba visit is the right move. I'll be joined by two Cuban Americans on two very different sides of the issue, a judge and an activist. Whether it's a tornado in the U.S., an earthquake in Nepal, natural disasters leave many of us feeling helpless. That's what got one local man to start connecting willing hands to people in need. He's been doing it now for more than a decade. Stephanie Leyden introduces us to tonight's Greater Bostonian.
So if you just dump one of those yogurts right in here.
There was a time when Gay Campbell wondered if her husband David would ever get back home to Carlisle. He had just ended his run as a tech company CEO when he took off for Thailand. It was 2004, and a deadly tsunami had killed hundreds of thousands of people. The devastation was massive, and Campbell, who had spent years focused on expanding uses for the internet, realized he could help.
The tsunami was the worst natural disaster that had occurred in my lifetime. And I thought, who else will think of using the internet from the middle of a disaster?
He connected with locals and then connected to the world. He set up a website highlighting the needs in just one village. The response was immediate.
When volunteers saw the website and would say, I'm coming next week, what did you need? We might say, bring 2 chainsaws with you, so that we had this flow of stuff coming in and people. And the group went from 20 to 40 to 80 in the first several weeks.
He had harnessed the goodwill of people who wanted to do something in the wake of disaster. It was the beginning of All Hands, a nonprofit that in the last decade has connected 30,000 volunteers to communities ravaged by tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes.
This wonderful woman was in Haiti, and we were helping her rebuild her home.
Images of disaster survivors, volunteers, and family create a single collage, a showcase of David Campbell's legacy.
How many countries are represented here?
Probably a dozen.
There will be more disasters and more people who want to help.
Hello.
Hey. Campbell wants to make sure All Hands is there to make the connection. This is the first group of All Hands Fellows. They've served as volunteers. Now they're receiving intense disaster relief training.
It's just sort of fun to think of it as, a trip around the world, but to help somebody.
They'll lead volunteers building schools in earthquake-ravaged Nepal and cleaning out flood-damaged homes in Detroit. Campbell hopes some will be among the next generation to continue All Hands' work rebuilding communities and renewing hope.
When you're in a community, when 100 people have come to help you like that, you really realize the world knows about your pain and cares enough about it to do something about it.
Disaster can impact anyone. David Campbell created a way for anyone to help. Stephanie Leyden, WGBH News.
All Hands volunteers pay their own way to the disaster scenes. Some stick with the project for months, others spend a couple of days. You can find out more about them at hands.org. If you know someone making a difference, let us know. Email us at the address on your screen and nominate them to be our next Greater Bostonian. Time now for tomorrow's Globe Tonight. Your first look at Tuesday morning's Boston Globe with city editor Steve Smith. What do you feature in tomorrow, Steve?
Call it a ceasefire, Jim, between DraftKings and New York's Attorney General. The Boston-based fantasy sports site and its biggest competitor, Draft Duels, have reached an agreement with New York's AG to stop doing business in the state indefinitely. Why, you might ask? Would two companies volunteer to pull the plug on their operations in New York? Well, it is amazing the motivation that comes from the threat of hundreds of millions of dollars in sanctions, and that's what New York AG Eric Schneiderman was threatening. Now the fate of these companies resides with state lawmakers. The state Senate in New York last week passed a resolution that would legalize these fantasy sports sites but regulate them.
Speaking of regulate, very quickly, our Attorney General has determined that it is legal. She's promulgated regulations about to go into effect. This has no impact on us, correct?
No, it only pertains to New York, but you have to think that this could provide a roadmap to other states looking to deal with these games.
Steve, thanks so much. See you again tomorrow. So yesterday was the first day of spring. Today marks the return of winter. The snow and cold doesn't faze me at all. Spring arrived at 12:30 in the a.m. Sunday morning. I was long asleep, so I set my alarm for 12:29 so I could be up to celebrate the spring equinox, though briefly. That part's not true, but all the rest is. There was snow on the ground, and it was still coming down when I got to work this morning. Yet I walked from the garage with no coat, freezing. You know why? It's spring. Would have worn flip-flops, but I hate them, even in August. The coming of spring changes everything. Admittedly, it wasn't the most gruesome winter, except for those few -5, some ungodly wind-chill days. But the arrival of spring means a new everything. Don't worry, no talk of crocuses or crack of the bat here. No, but people are nicer to other people, warmer, more open. It isn't just layers of clothing that's peeled away, but layers of personal insulation. Car windows are open. The air smells different. We smell different. You don't sit in the house hours before walking your kid's dog thinking, I can't believe I have to walk the damn dog. And let me be clear. It's not because yesterday was International Happiness Day, the motto of which is, I will try to create more happiness in the world around me. Think I'll be doing that? Nevertheless, you name it. Everything changed 12:30 yesterday morning. Spring has come to Boston. Let it snow. What do you think? Email us, tweet us, share your thoughts. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. The head of the Special Legislative Committee on Marijuana here in Massachusetts, that's Senator Jason Lewis, just said no to legalization. He'll join me to explain why. Plus, the minds behind AO Biome, that's a local company that aims to use your own natural bacteria to keep you clean. One of the guests hasn't taken a shower in more than a decade. I may sit over there, actually. That and more tomorrow at 7. One more thing before we go. Almost 2 years to the day and $103 million later, the MBTA's Government Center station is back in action. The grand reopening and ribbon-cutting ceremony was held this morning. What a difference. With a grand glass entrance, lobby, new platforms, elevators, escalators, fully accessible. Before the station's closure, T officials estimated about 10,000 people a day passed through.